Let's discuss right now this new potential vice president and the intrigue surrounding the assassination attempt and the U.S. election campaign with David Remnick, journalist, author, and editor-in-chief of the legendary magazine, The New Yorker. David, welcome.
Good to see you. Good to see you.
It's a pleasure to see you. Thank you very much, David. First of all, I wanted to ask you about JD Vance, currently the most recent development. What does his election as the vice presidential candidate signify for the United States and the world?
Of all the people that Donald Trump was considering, this is the most disastrous, certainly for Ukraine, for the future of NATO, and he is a kind of populist inheritor of Donald Trump. I think Donald Trump is quite confident that he's going to win in the fall. The assassination attempt, which was horrific, has only added to his aura of, I don't know, invincibility. And I don't think he felt that he needed to make a kind of tactical choice for vice president, as we sometimes do. One of the people being considered at the last minute was said to be Glenn Youngkin, a kind of right of center governor of Virginia, and maybe that would have won. I don't think he felt he needed such a tactical thing. He just picked somebody who would imitate, if not exacerbate, his red meat rhetoric. And I think on Ukraine, which is the issue you've been discussing, it's potentially a very bad influence come next January, if Trump wins.
You seem quite certain that Trump will win, David. Is that right?
Well, anything can happen in American politics. The volatility of this race has been there from the start. But as you know, Joe Biden had a disastrous presidential debate, which undermined confidence in his ability to not to make policy in the present tense, but to communicate that policy, which is a big part of being a politician. And also it undermined confidence in his ability to lead in the years ahead, because as we know, biology is what it is. It's relentless, and aging can often be or it's always a very difficult thing. And he aged in front of our eyes on national television in front of 50 million people. So that undermined Biden's position. The assassination attempt, again, which is a horrible indication of where we are in America. And as much as I oppose Trump, I thank God that he was only injured rather than something much worse. But it added to this sense of him as somebody tough and strong, and the contrast for many people with Biden is there. And so, again, anything could happen. Maybe Biden will listen to people around him and step down for somebody else like Kamala Harris. But that is certainly no guarantee either that Trump will not be defeated in November. Right now, Trump is got to be the favorite to win.
I will return to Biden shortly, but I want to go back to Vance, the vice presidential candidate for the United States. I've heard from some analysts that now, with Donald Trump close to the presidency, he might start considering uniting the nations of the world, that this might become more important to him than populism, and that essentially Vance will follow Trump wherever he goes. Can we count on this? Do you have even the slightest hope that the former president, if he returns to the Oval Office, will listen to reason and uphold the United States' tradition of being the leader of the free world?
Well, you have this expression in Russian as well as in English, as Nadezhda Mandelstam would say, hope against hope. I hope against hope that Donald Trump is capable of change, but most 77-year-olds don't change very much in their basic reflexes and their rhetoric. And I don't expect Donald Trump to change profoundly. His rhetoric from the start of his time in politics has always been incendiary and divisive and bigoted. I say this not out of any joy or partisan impulse. It's just the truth. And if TV Rain and The New Yorker are here for any reason, it's to report the truth. And that's, he may give a more subdued speech at the convention. I expect he will. In fact, just his presence on the stand with the bandage on his ear will be message enough in a way. But I don't think that, if anything, I think if anything, he's going to become a more self-assured president, even more ideological. The plans he's been making in foreign policy and domestic policy are even more populist, and I fear more effective in a sense, because he's a more experienced president, if that's what he becomes again. You've heard of the 2025 plan. It's highly ideological. It involves policies like mass deportation of immigrants and migrants. And as you know, a much more isolationist foreign policy when it comes to things like Ukraine or Europe or any other number of policies. So while he may in the short term use some of the rhetoric of unity, and he would be intelligent as well as moral to do so, I think Donald Trump is who he is, and I don't expect him to change profoundly in the weeks and months and even years ahead.
David, you wrote an article in The New Yorker that leaves readers with a deep sense of unease, to put it mildly, and worry not only for the U.S., but for liberal democracy as a whole. You believe that Biden should withdraw from the race. You said the same back in late June after the debates. Following the assassination attempt on Trump, what has changed? Does liberal democracy still have a chance in the United States? You mentioned that Kamala Harris isn't necessarily guaranteed to win, but if Biden steps down, is there a greater chance of defeating Trump, or is it now inevitable that he will return to the White House?
Again, nothing is for sure. Nothing is for sure. So I don't know. But I will say this. There cannot be an analogy between the Russian experience and the American experience. As difficult as the situation is with America, and it was like this in 2016, and maybe it is now again, the advantage is that you had the very, very beginnings, the first signs of liberal democracy in the wake of the collapse of the Soviet Union. And for the reasons that we have discussed endlessly, that promise was betrayed, and Russia is now in a terrible authoritarian position, and probably will be for years to come. The United States has 2 centuries of complicated constitutional history, but liberal democracy, as embattled as it has been in the 19th century, and we really only became a fully liberal democracy of equality after the civil rights laws of the 1960s. We have many advantages, institutional and otherwise. So, but I do think it is a battle. I think it is not that it should be violent, but it should be honest. We should look reality square in the face. I think that Donald Trump, and this is not a matter of, these are things that he says outright and he acts upon as both a candidate and as a president, is not a liberal Democrat. His instincts are authoritarian and populist in many dangerous ways. So I am not, if he wins, I think in the short run, term at least, we have a prolonged crisis that is being resumed.
I wanted to clarify something here. When some analysts talk about the United States being on the brink of civil war, is this serious, or is it an exaggeration?
I think it's something to be concerned about. I think political violence has a history in the United States. How many presidential candidates and presidents have been either assassinated or there have been attempts on their life? There have been far too many. And what that could inspire, what the shooting the other day could have set off, is something that is extremely alarming. January 6th was an incident inspired by Donald Trump, by the way, that could have led to even greater violence. We know that there are, from the FBI and other law enforcement sources, there are groups in the country that are armed and are constantly talking about doing awful things. Look, you've seen it in Russia too. You've seen political violence. You see this in many places in the world. So it's something that we need to be aware of. I don't think if there civil war is not in the sense of people in blue uniforms and gray uniforms standing with rifles across from each other, but there are other kinds of civil conflict that could make life in this country politically and otherwise extremely dangerous, and we need to be on our alarmed about it and act on it.
Finally, I'd like to ask you one last thing. You're probably aware that Putin often claims that Russia, with its current political course, is supported by the global majority, as he puts it. He also says that a multipolar world has already emerged and that the United States is losing its position as a leader. Do you agree with this?
Well, I think at the very least, the ascendance of China makes it impossible to say that there's one superpower. There was a very brief period following 1991 that America talked in those terms and other people talked in those terms. It was arrogant to do so and foolish to do so, and now it just makes no sense whatsoever. The United States is a superpower, and I just my political impulses are to hope and pray that it acts in a moral way, and also in its foreign policy acts on the side not only of its interests but in what is right. And this is part of what I fear coming out of the appointment of JD Vance. Vice presidents don't make policy, but they can reinforce or influence the policy of the president. And so yesterday's news for Ukraine was not good news at all.
I see, David, that you're not in the best of moods and finding it difficult to keep up with the news.
No, это так. Это правда.
Even from outside the United States, it's hard for me to follow these developments. I completely understand that this is a very challenging and yet very interesting time. We'll continue to monitor the situation. Thank you. David Remnick, journalist, author, and editor-in-chief of The New Yorker, live on TV Rain.